One morning, I woke up to an empty bank account and a text message that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. It was from my husband, Jake. The message was cold and simple. I found someone new. That was the moment I realized he wasn't just leaving me. He was trying to erase every part of our future. My entire savings were gone, vanished overnight. No warning, no explanation, just betrayal. My name is Emily Carter. I never imagined the man I trusted most could hurt me like this. Jake and I had built our life together from scratch. We dreamed of a future filled with hope and security. But all that disappeared in a heartbeat. What he didn't expect was that I wasn't broken. I was just getting started. This is the story of how I faced that darkness head on and rebuilt everything he tried to take away. What came next was nothing like he imagined. Payback arrived sooner than he thought, and his regret was beyond anything I had hoped for. Before everything fell apart, my life with Jake felt like it was moving steadily forward. We weren't flashy or rich by any means, but we had what most people want: a partnership built on trust, shared dreams, and hard work. I'm Emily Carter, 34 years old, a graphic designer working from home. Jake was 36, a software engineer with a calm, steady presence that made me feel safe. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind with tree-lined streets and neighbors who waved hello. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours, and we took pride in what we had built together. Jake and I met in college and married 5 years ago. I still remember the day vividly. There was a quiet confidence about him, a sincerity in his eyes that made me believe he was someone I could count on for the long haul. Early in our marriage, we talked endlessly about our future: a house with a small garden, maybe a dog, and eventually kids. We were both practical people, not the type to get swept away by big, unrealistic fantasies, but the plans we made felt meaningful and real. Our days were simple but full. Jake worked long hours at a tech company downtown, and I managed my design projects from our small home office. We found comfort in routines: weekend hikes with my sister Sarah, dinners with my mother Linda, and quiet movie nights curled up on the couch. Sarah was my closest friend, just 3 years younger, with a bright laugh and endless encouragement. She always reminded me to believe in myself, especially when I doubted my worth. My mother, Linda, was a constant source of strength. She raised me on stories of resilience and independence and never let me settle for less than I deserved. Despite the comfort, things weren't perfect. Over the past few months before everything changed, Jake seemed distant. I chalked it up to work stress. He'd come home late, tired, sometimes barely talking, absorbed in his phone. I asked if everything was okay, and he'd assure me it was. Just busy. We stopped sharing the little details of our days, but I thought it was normal. Sometimes relationships have dry spells. I never suspected he was hiding something far worse. On one particularly ordinary evening, I remember reaching out to him over the phone. "Jake, do you want to grab dinner tonight?" I asked, hoping to reconnect. He paused, then said, "Not tonight, Emily. Just some extra work." His voice was flat, almost detached. It didn't feel like him. I put the phone down, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach, but I pushed the worry aside, telling myself it was temporary. Our savings were modest but steady. Over the years, we had been careful with money, squirreling away every spare dollar. It was meant for something important: a down payment on a home, maybe even a small business one day. I handled most of the budgeting and bills, and I trusted Jake completely. We were a team, or so I believed. The morning of the betrayal started like any other. I woke up early, brewed coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop to pay some bills. When I logged into our joint bank account, my heart stopped. The balance was zero, every dollar gone. I double-checked the numbers, refreshed the page, convinced it was a glitch, but it wasn't. The savings we had worked so hard to build were completely drained. Panic surged through me as I reached for my phone and called Jake. No answer. I sent him a message asking what was going on, my hands trembling. Then came the text. I found someone new. 4 words that hit me harder than any physical blow could. No explanation, no apology, just those words and silence. The world tilted beneath me. I felt everything unravel in an instant. The dreams, the trust, the sense of safety. Questions flooded my mind. How long had this been happening? Why didn't he tell me? Was anything real? I sat there, numb and shaking, the weight of betrayal pressing down like a storm cloud I couldn't escape. I wasn't alone, though. My sister Sarah was there immediately, her voice steady as I cried over the phone. "Emily, you're not going through this alone. We'll figure this out. You're stronger than you think." My mother, Linda, flew in from out of state within days, wrapping me in her arms and reminding me of my worth and resilience. Despite the shock and heartbreak, I knew I couldn't let this destroy me. The life Jake tried to erase was still mine to reclaim. But in those first moments, the pain was raw, the loss overwhelming. I had to face the reality of starting over with nothing but the support of my family and whatever strength I could find inside. The day I discovered Jake had emptied our savings was the day my world stopped making sense. I sat at the kitchen table staring at my laptop screen, the number $0.00 glaring back at me like an accusation. Every penny we had worked so hard to save, every late night, every sacrifice, vanished without a trace. I couldn't believe it. I refreshed the page over and over, hoping it was some kind of mistake, but it wasn't. The account was completely drained. My mind raced as panic set in. I called Jake's phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent text after text, my hands shaking, begging for answers. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably just minutes, his reply came through. "I found someone new." Those words felt like knives twisting in my chest. No explanation, no warning, just a cold, brutal message that left me reeling. I sat there stunned, unable to process the betrayal. How could he do this to me? To us? We had built this life together. We had shared dreams and plans, and suddenly it felt like it was all a lie. I felt exposed and vulnerable in a way I never had before. The security I had taken for granted was gone, replaced by a crushing sense of loss and disbelief. In the days that followed, the reality of what Jake had done began to settle in. I was not only heartbroken, but left without any financial safety net. The bills still came, the mortgage payments were due, and everyday expenses didn't stop because of his disappearance. I felt overwhelmed and terrified, facing the uncertainty of how I would survive without any money or support. The fear wasn't just about money, it was about my future and whether I could ever trust anyone again. At the same time, I was fighting a tidal wave of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion, and even a painful sense of guilt. Was there something I had missed? Did I do something wrong? My mind kept searching for reasons to make sense of the senseless, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Jake had made a choice, and it wasn't about me. It was about him. During this dark time, I leaned heavily on my sister Sarah and my mother Linda. Sarah became my lifeline. She listened patiently, never judging, always encouraging me to stay strong. "You're not alone," she reminded me, "and you're stronger than you think." My mother was equally supportive, offering a mix of tough love and comfort. She urged me to focus on what I could control and reminded me that sometimes life's hardest moments reveal our deepest strengths. Despite their support, the loneliness of betrayal was suffocating. I found myself questioning every memory, every conversation we had shared. How had I missed the signs? Jake had been so distant lately, but I had convinced myself it was just stress from work. I replayed moments in my mind, his late nights, his secretive phone calls, the way he avoided eye contact, and the pieces started to fit together in the most painful way. I also faced practical challenges that hit me hard. Without access to our savings, paying rent and buying groceries became a daily struggle. I took stock of what little I had left, a few credit cards with low limits and my steady income from graphic design freelancing. But even that wasn't enough to cover everything. The constant stress drained me, and some nights I lay awake wondering how I would manage the coming weeks. One morning, after a restless night, I found myself staring at the ceiling, trying to hold back tears. I thought about Jake and that text, the one that had shattered my world, and a fierce determination started to grow inside me. I refused to let his betrayal define my life. I refused to be the victim of someone else's selfish choices. The turning point was subtle, but powerful. It came during a phone call with Sarah when I said out loud, "I don't want this to be the end of my story." Saying those words made the pain feel real, but it also sparked a tiny flame of hope. I realized that while I couldn't change what Jake did, I could control how I responded. I could rebuild. I could fight back, not with anger or revenge, but with resilience and strength. Still, the path ahead looked daunting. I had no idea where to start or how to fix everything that was broken. The betrayal cut so deep that trusting anyone again felt impossible, but I knew I had to try, for myself, for my future, and for the life I still wanted to live. In those first few weeks, every day was a battle. I juggled calls to creditors, looked for extra freelance work, and leaned on Sarah and Linda more than ever. I cried more than I thought I could, but I also began to plan. I started writing down goals, no matter how small, and focused on taking back control one step at a time. I reminded myself constantly that this was not the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter. What Jake didn't count on was that his betrayal would awaken a strength in me I never knew I had. His actions pushed me to fight harder than ever before. I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing to rise, to rebuild, and to reclaim the life he tried to steal. After those first overwhelming weeks of shock and despair, something inside me shifted. I realized that waiting for Jake to come back or for my life to magically fix itself wasn't going to happen. I had a choice. I could let this betrayal destroy me, or I could take control and fight back. It wasn't an easy decision. There were days when I felt exhausted, defeated, and scared, but deep down, I knew I had to act. The first step was accepting the reality of my situation. I no longer had access to our savings, and Jake wasn't answering my calls. There was no chance for a conversation, no possibility of an explanation or apology that would undo the damage. I had to face the truth. I was on my own, financially and emotionally. The weight of that truth was crushing, but it also sparked a fierce determination in me. I told myself that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just a difficult chapter. I started by taking stock of everything I had left. My freelance graphic design work was my lifeline. It wasn't much at first, but it was something. I contacted a few past clients and asked if they had any projects coming up. I also created profiles on freelance platforms and began reaching out to potential new clients. I had to hustle harder than ever before, sometimes working late into the night after long days just to make ends meet. The exhaustion was real, but so was my resolve. Around this time, I reached out to my Uncle Tom. He's a quiet but wise man who runs a small printing business in the city. I hadn't worked with him much before, but I remembered him saying once that he admired my design skills. When I told him what had happened, he didn't hesitate. "Emily, come work with me. We'll figure this out together." That offer was a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. Uncle Tom gave me a steady paycheck and the chance to rebuild my confidence alongside people who respected my talent. At home, my sister Sarah and my mother Linda were my constant support. Sarah would check in every day, sometimes just to remind me to eat or take a break. Linda was more practical. She helped me create a strict budget, cutting out anything unnecessary. "It's about survival right now," she said firmly. "But remember, this is temporary. You're building the foundation for something better." Their support kept me grounded when my own doubts tried to take over. While all of this was happening, I also took steps to protect myself legally. I spoke to a lawyer recommended by a friend to understand my rights and options. It was intimidating, but necessary. I learned that Jake's actions were illegal, and there were ways to hold him accountable. That knowledge gave me a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in weeks. I wasn't just a victim, I was someone who could fight back through the system. Emotionally, the journey was roller coaster. Some days the anger burned so hot I could barely think straight. Other days, the sadness overwhelmed me, but I refused to let those feelings control me. Instead, I used them as fuel. Every late night spent working, every phone call with a client, every small payment I made toward bills reminded me that I was reclaiming my life piece by piece. One afternoon, I remember sitting at my kitchen table reviewing invoices and upcoming projects. It hit me how far I'd come since that devastating morning. I wasn't just surviving, I was creating. The future I had imagined with Jake was gone, but I was building a new one on my own terms. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's choices, especially not someone who had betrayed me. The biggest shift came when I stopped waiting for Jake to come back or to apologize. I understood that forgiveness or reconciliation might never happen, and that was okay. I didn't need his validation or regret to move forward. Instead, I focused on myself, on healing, growing, and planning. I started setting goals beyond just making rent, saving for a new apartment, expanding my client base, even thinking about going back to school for business management. Throughout this time, I discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was quiet and steady. It was waking up each day and choosing to keep going, even when everything felt hopeless. It was reaching out for help when I needed it and accepting that I couldn't do it all alone. It was reminding myself that my past didn't define me and my future was still mine to shape. My family saw this transformation too. Sarah told me one night, "You're not the same scared Emily anymore. You're unstoppable." Hearing that made me smile. It wasn't about revenge or proving Jake wrong. It was about reclaiming my life and refusing to be broken by someone else's betrayal. This turning point was the moment everything began to change. I wasn't just reacting to what happened. I was taking control and building something new. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was no longer afraid. I was ready. Months passed since Jake vanished from my life, taking our savings and shattering the trust I had placed in him. In that time, I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, piece by piece. I worked harder than I ever thought possible, balancing multiple freelance projects, helping Uncle Tom at his printing business, and slowly growing my own client base. The financial hole Jake left behind was deep, but I refused to let it define me or my future. One morning, I woke up to a text that made my heart stop. It was from Jake. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I was ready to face whatever he had to say. When I finally read it, my breath caught. "Emily, I made a huge mistake. Can we talk?" The message was desperate, the tone completely different from the cold, distant man who had left me stranded months before. I stared at the screen, the memories flooding back, the betrayal, the sleepless nights, the overwhelming struggle to keep going. But I wasn't the same person I had been when he left. I was stronger, wiser, and no longer willing to be his victim. Still, part of me knew I needed closure, so I agreed to meet him, but on my terms. We met at a quiet cafe, the place filled with the hum of strangers and the smell of fresh coffee. When Jake saw me, his eyes were filled with regret, but there was no excuse that could erase what he had done. I listened as he apologized, his voice shaking as he admitted the mistakes he had made, the lies, the betrayal, and the selfishness that destroyed our marriage. But I didn't respond with anger or tears. Instead, I spoke calmly and clearly. "Jake, what you did broke more than just our savings. It broke the trust that took years to build. I've had to fight every day to rebuild my life since you left. I'm not the same person who believed in us blindly." He looked down, ashamed. "I'm sorry, Emily. I was a coward. I never meant to hurt you like this." "I don't want your pity," I said firmly. "What matters now is that I'm moving forward without you. I'm rebuilding on my own, and I've taken legal steps to hold you accountable for what you did." I saw the weight of my words hit him like a punch. The man who thought he could walk away without consequences was finally facing the reality he'd created. But the true turning point wasn't in his regret. It was in my own sense of power. I realized that the payback Jake didn't expect wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about reclaiming my life and my peace of mind. The satisfaction came from knowing I had risen above his betrayal and created something stronger from the ruins. In the weeks that followed, the legal process began to take shape. My lawyer secured a court order that forced Jake to repay part of the stolen savings and restricted his access to any joint assets. The system wasn't perfect, but it was a step toward justice. More importantly, it symbolized my refusal to be silenced or erased. Outside of the courtroom, my life blossomed in ways I hadn't imagined possible. My freelance business grew steadily, and I landed a few bigger clients that gave me both confidence and financial stability. Uncle Tom's printing business thrived too, and I took pride in the fact that I was contributing and building something on my own terms. My relationship with my family deepened. Sarah and Linda remained by my side, celebrating every small victory and reminding me of my strength when doubts crept in. I even started volunteering at a local support group for women going through difficult divorces and financial struggles. Helping others reminded me how far I'd come and reinforced my commitment to never let anyone else define my worth. One evening, as I sat in my modest new apartment, furnished with pieces I'd bought with my own hard-earned money, I felt a quiet sense of triumph. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer controlled me. I was free. The moment Jake realized he had lost more than just money came quietly, but powerfully. His regret was real, but it was no longer my burden to carry. I had taken back my life with grace and determination. Looking back, I understand now that the biggest payback wasn't legal or financial. It was the transformation within myself, the courage to face betrayal, the strength to rebuild, and the wisdom to move forward without bitterness. That was the victory Jake never saw coming. After everything I had been through, the most profound change wasn't just in my circumstances, it was within me. The betrayal, the financial ruin, and the emotional upheaval forced me to confront parts of myself I hadn't fully acknowledged before. I learned that resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about transforming pain into purpose and finding strength you never knew you had. In the months following the legal victory and my financial recovery, I took time to reflect on what had happened and what it meant for my future. Losing Jake and the life we had built wasn't just an ending, it was an opportunity for a new beginning. I realized that my identity wasn't tied to my marriage or the money we had saved. My worth came from my values, my courage, and my ability to keep moving forward. One of the hardest lessons I learned was about trust. It was shattered in the worst way, and rebuilding it felt impossible at times. But I also understood that trust is something you give carefully, not recklessly. I learned to set boundaries, to listen to my instincts, and to prioritize my well-being above all else. That shift changed how I approached every relationship after Jake. My family continued to be my rock. Sarah, my sister, and Linda, my mother, were there for every step, celebrating my successes, comforting me during setbacks, and reminding me that I was never alone. Their love wasn't just a safety net, it was a foundation that helped me grow. I started to lean on them not just as support, but as partners in rebuilding my life. We grew closer through shared experiences, late-night talks, and simple moments of laughter that felt like healing balm. Another unexpected outcome was the new community I found. Volunteering at a local support group for women who had faced betrayal and financial hardship gave me purpose beyond my personal struggles. Hearing others' stories reminded me that I wasn't alone and that strength could be found in shared vulnerability. Helping others helped me heal, and it gave me a sense of empowerment that went beyond money or legal wins. As I rebuilt my career, I also rediscovered passions I had set aside. I began exploring new design styles, taking online courses, and even dreaming about starting my own creative agency one day. The future suddenly looked full of possibilities instead of obstacles. I realized that while Jake's actions had torn down my past, they couldn't dictate what I would build next. Perhaps the most important lesson was about forgiveness, not the kind that lets someone off the hook, but the kind that frees you. I didn't forgive Jake to absolve him of what he did. I forgave him to release the anger and bitterness that threatened to consume me. Forgiveness was my way of reclaiming peace, of refusing to let his betrayal define my life story. Looking back now, I see that the hardest moments were also the moments that shaped me. They forced me to dig deeper, to fight harder, and to grow stronger. I learned that pain and growth are often intertwined, and sometimes the darkest storms bring the brightest dawns. I want anyone watching this to know that no matter how devastating betrayal or loss may feel, there is always a way forward. You are stronger than you realize. You don't have to let someone else's mistakes erase your dreams or your future. Rebuilding is hard, but it's possible, and it can lead to a life you never imagined. Today, I live in a cozy apartment filled with things I've earned through my own effort. My career is thriving and my relationships are healthier because I know my boundaries and value my worth. I'm no longer defined by what Jake took from me, but by what I've built for myself. This story isn't just about betrayal or payback. It's about reclaiming your life after loss, finding your voice after silence, and discovering that the strongest power lies within you. Jake left thinking he had won, but I proved that real victory comes from resilience, courage, and the refusal to be broken. If you're facing a similar battle right now, remember this: your pain doesn't have to be your prison. It can be your catalyst for change. You can rebuild, you can heal, and you can thrive. And when you do, you'll find a strength that no betrayal can ever take away.